Awesome. Thanks for that great intro. So I'll go over what it is, why I chose this, explain a little bit high level of how this works, and then a live demo portion to follow. So I've got here my diagram that I just high level use to describe what the system is. And what it is essentially, I wanted to be able to measure the moisture level of my garden beds. And I'm not sure if I'm going to end up using it outside, but certainly even for some of my indoor seedlings that I start before the gardening season, I feel that this would be something that I could end up using nicely. And one of the reasons why I chose this is just something I always kind of wanted to do and never really got a chance to do it. And I'm also a little bit of a hardware enthusiast. I would not say I am by any means an expert. So there was a bit of revisioning and review that was needed. Also, just bearing in mind that it is for 2 weeks, I did want to also try to keep it fairly simple to start. How it works high level is I run a sensor off of a Raspberry Pi, which I'll show you in a moment, and go into the hardware in a little bit more detail. But essentially, I envisioned building out 2 web interfaces. So my first one would be an admin system, and this is where I would be using Vue on the front end and Node on the back end. Now, I unfortunately don't have this piece fully working. I am relatively new to both of these. So for the rest of the demo, we're going to focus primarily on the monitoring piece, which is leveraging Grafana for the visualizations and Prometheus on the back end. So if I scroll down here, this kind of just gives you a little bit more detail of the breakdown of how this would work. Essentially, I envisioned running a Prometheus exporter right on the Raspberry Pi, which is going to be polling the sensor itself, which would then be exposed to Prometheus, which itself would then be connected into Grafana. So to show you the hardware, just bring up my screen here. So hopefully it's nice and clear for everybody. I'll just shut my window here. So you see here, we have my Raspberry Pi Model 3. I do eventually want this to be used with a camera. So I do have a little camera here. It's really kind of just for show, but essentially I have it connected through my GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. And you'll notice there's a little piece here, and that's just a logic converter. So essentially it's powered through Arduino, which is something I actually realized I just forgot to mention. So given that the sensor I'm working with is analog, I needed some kind of interface between it and the Raspberry Pi. And I happen to have an old Arduino lying around, so I thought might as well use it. Arduino works with 5 volts. The Raspberry Pi works with 3.3. So this little thing in the middle here just makes sure that they can talk nice to each other. So the communication protocol for this is I2C. And it's actually pretty simple to set up. What you're also seeing here is my little plant here as a demo. This is the actual sensor itself. And I've got a glass of water here, and I'll show you why I'm going to use that in a few minutes. So that is a high level of the hardware. Taking a look now on the software side of things, I've got essentially my Arduino code here, which is very, very simple, very basic code that essentially will expect data to be submitted, a request to be submitted, which I then send. I just read the moisture levels from the pin and send that back to the Raspberry Pi. I also, just kind of as a way to debug to make sure that it's working, I do have a little LED that's flipping on and on. So I actually do have it running now. So you might notice here on the screen that it is actually flashing. And on the Raspberry Pi side of things, I have a simple, a very simple script here, leveraging the Prometheus client. That's the official client from that's provided via Python. And essentially, I'm basically running a very small server reading the data from the Arduino and then making it available as a Prometheus gauge measurement. So again, it's just running on the Raspberry Pi, this thing on port 8000. And if I go over here to my, okay, so essentially right here, you'll see this is the results from that script, which you'll see every time you call it, it's providing the live value from the sensor, which again, as you may recall, Python script is also asking the Arduino to turn on the LED. So that tells me that it's working, which I then have it hooked up into a Prometheus and Grafana instance, which I'm running locally. So over here, I've got my Prometheus instance, which pretty basic setup, really. I've got it configured for my scraping, which is going to pull off that Raspberry Pi, which for now I just hard-coded the IPs, and then I have it hooked up to my Grafana instance here, which if I show you, here's the Prometheus instance, where you can see that it is actually reading the data correctly. And then over here on the Grafana instance, I've got the full dashboard, which ideally, once this is filled with more sensors, as I would like to in the future, expand this to capture wind or temperature, etc. I would be adding those over here, and you'll see how it just refreshes periodically as I've got it configured. Now here comes the last part here, which I'll show you, which is if I go back over here, the sensor itself to see it change. So when I have it right now in the plant, I'm going to put it now in my glass of water, and you'll see that the sensor value will instantly jump. So I've got it there in the water now. If I go back to my Grafana instance, I did have this a little earlier, so there's a bit of a delay here, but we should see from looking at the raw data that my moisture sensor value has gone way up now. It's over 95%. And so, yeah, you'll see it here reflected now. And generally speaking, I just kind of did this here for the purposes of the demo. Generally, it depends on what you're growing, but you kind of want to keep it at between 40 to 80%. So that's why for now I have this marked as red. Eventually, I do also want to leverage the alerting functionality within Grafana to allow me to send me an email, or I was also thinking about something like Telegram, where I know they've got a bot API where it's pretty simple to get it working. And so that's the extent of what I've got to show you for today. Thanks for listening in and tuning in.